All Gideon could do was sit there, and he wasn't sure what to even think about what God had told him. It kept going through his mind. Gideon, warrior of God. Warrior of God? I don't know about that. I don't even know about being a warrior of anything. What do I know about leading a group of people? What do I even know about leading myself? I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with this. But as he sat and as he was thinking, he remembered the signs that God had given him. And he said to himself once again, God did exactly as I asked, and even more. Maybe there is a reason for what he's doing. So Gideon got up and was getting ready for the morning's activities and breakfast and other things. And before breakfast, he decided, I think I'm going to go take a walk. So as he was walking through his fields, he realized that there was a presence behind him. Didn't think anything of it until all of a sudden he felt a hand on his shoulder, and that always scared him because Gideon knew that there was no one around. He turned around ready to put the person on the ground, and he realized that it was Jesus himself. And Gideon fell on his face once again, not sure even what to do because he knew that there was going to be something more that he was going to be asked of. Jesus smiled and put his hand on his shoulder once again and told him to get up. Both of them sat down right underneath a tree not too far away, and Jesus went and told him what he wanted him to do now. Gideon shook his head and went, I really don't know, Lord. Are you really sure about what you're saying? Jesus chuckled and said, yeah, I've had this plan in place for a long, long time, and now it's ready to be done, and you're ready to be used. Gideon shook his head and turned the other way and was about to say something and turned to where Jesus was, and he realized that Jesus wasn't there anymore. He pinched himself to make sure that he wasn't dreaming, and he was awake. Oh, and that hurt. Hurt even worse than one of his kids trying to pinch him. Got up and dusted himself off, and all of a sudden he realized, I'm late for breakfast. So we ran back through the fields and got into the house, and he apologized to the whole family for being late. And he sat down, and his youngest daughter noticed something, and she said, Dad, looks like you've got something on your mind. Looks like there's trouble coming. And he looked at her and he said, oh, if you only knew. Well, I don't know, so why don't you tell me? To start with, he shook his head and wasn't sure how to actually share with the family what was going to happen. But then all he heard was what Jesus told him. Just trust me. Just go and do what I've asked you to do. So he started the story from the very beginning and started to unwrap what God had told him to do, and especially how he had gone into town and even gone on his parents' farm and destroyed the ancient altars to the many different idols. His wife looked at him and said, I was contacted by your parents and I thought that was something that you did, but I decided not to say anything because I knew that your dad would be right down here to really have some interesting words with you. Gideon chuckled and said, yeah, you know my parents all too well. But then all of a sudden he became quiet again, not wanting to share with them the next thing that God had asked of him. His wife knew that there was something more, and his oldest son grabbed him by the arm and said, Dad, just tell us. We know that there's something going on. Just tell us what's going on. Just tell us what God told you to do. So he told them, and the oldest went, I'm going to work. You're not going to draft me into this. The rest of the family just laughed and knew that the whole idea of the son going to work was probably that he was going down to the local swimming hole to meet his friends, and even that he was actually going to meet his fiancée as well later that day. So they just shook their heads and they laughed, and Gideon felt that hand on his shoulder again, but he knew this time Jesus wasn't there. He was there in spirit, but he wasn't there physically. And he knew that it was time that he had to leave the house and go into the community and actually do what God had told him to do. He was still very hesitant because the whole idea of trying to get a group together to go to war against a nation that had been causing them problems for a long time seemed very awful. It seemed absurd. But at the same time, they asked Gideon to be a judge, and that's what God had called him to do as well. So he's got his stuff together and started down the road to town and was talking with God the whole way because he had no idea what to do. God gave him an idea about putting up different signs at different areas around town to get people to come to where he was going to be at a certain time. Oh, that's a good idea. So he made the signs and he went around town posting them, and people thought this was really interesting, especially as they saw Gideon with a new fire in his eyes and not knowing what was really going to happen or how God was already using Gideon for a purpose that they couldn't even imagine. Time came when, as posted, Gideon was at the place where he was supposed to be. Many men from around the countryside had come to see exactly what Gideon had to say. Gideon got up on his little box and he started speaking to the men, and he shared with them the story of what had happened and what God was doing and what God had asked him to do. And he said, "Listen, men, God has asked me to gather a group of you together and to go to war against the nation that has been harming our people for a long time." A number of them looked at him and started laughing at him because they thought that he was very foolish for even doing this, but even more for even believing that God had actually called him to do this. Gideon didn't allow that to faze him, and he said, "Hey, listen, God called me to do this, and I'm not going to back down. You can either come and join me, or maybe we should say it like this. If you don't want to join, go ahead and leave now. It's okay. If you're afraid, if you have a fear that something's going to happen to your family, or that your life is going to be taken because of what God has asked me to do, go ahead and leave. God has promised the victory already. But if you don't believe that, God has also said it's okay for you to take off because we will not need you. You can actually be a hindrance to what we're supposed to be doing." A number of them shook their heads and they said together, "Yeah, exactly. We're going to leave. We're not going to stay here and let our lives be taken." So they watched as many of the men started to leave. 10, 20, hundreds, thousands. Other men went, "What are we supposed to do now, Gideon? We barely have several thousand people. That's not even enough going up against this nation of warriors that their children are born to war against other people." Gideon looked and he shook his head and he said, "Well, here's all I know. God keeps telling me just to stand fast and watch the salvation of the Lord." As he said that, people were reminded that Moses said that many years before, reminding the children of Israel when they were going to cross the Red Sea that God was with them and he was going to see them through. And even more than that, the very fact that they would not see that nation ever again. So this group of ragtag men were starting to wonder, maybe this is our modern day Moses. Maybe he's right. Maybe God is going to lead us to victory. So they got excited and, well, okay, let's go to war now. Gideon went, whoa, hold on, guys. The time is not yet. They went, excuse me? Why did you get us together then? This is but the start. Now we need to wait on God for the next portion. So he looked at them and he said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to meet me at this field by this river at this time tomorrow. God will show us what's next, and then we'll go forward with how he has plans. Men were very confused, but said, well, okay, well, what Gideon says, we'll follow it. All of them start heading home, and Gideon notices that it's just about sunset. And he realizes that, I'm already late. But not only am I late, my wife invited my parents over for dinner. And I have a feeling that I'm going to be getting some very harsh words from my dad because of what I did. Gideon got home and he opened the door and he smelled the aroma of his favorite meal. Eyebrows started to raise because he's like, this is probably because of what's going to happen. He comes in and he sees his parents sitting there in the living room. What happens next is what he wasn't expecting. Both of his parents jump up and they run over to him and then they embrace him. Gideon is surprised, taken back, because he thought that all that they would do was hit him because of what he had done. His dad grabbed him by the shoulders and put him at a distance and said, what you did is what I've been wanting to do for years, but I never had the courage. But God gave you the courage to do what I never could do, what we never could do. And both of his parents told him thank you, and they went into the next room and sat down for dinner. Hours and hours went by, and they were talking about this and talking about that until they realized that it was very early in the morning. And they said, well, probably we should go. Gideon said, we've got an extra room. Why don't you stay here for the night? So all of them went to bed and had a good night's sleep and continued on with their conversations in the morning. Little did Gideon know that this was the exact conversation that he needed to actually encourage the men in just a few more hours. Gideon told his wife what had happened and what was going to happen, and they prayed together, and then Gideon went down the road to the field and next to the river where he told them. And he chose a very good spot where the river was calm and you could see everywhere at the same time. As he was waiting, time went by several hours, and he said, well, maybe the men decided not to come. Then all of a sudden, out of all corners, this huge group of 6,000 men showed up. Gideon smiled and shook his head, going, okay, I forgot. So these guys have a hard time being on time. So they gather around Gideon, and okay, Gideon, what are we supposed to do? Do you want us to run? Do you want us to start showing you our muscles, how we can fight? He said, no. You see this pool of water behind me? I want you to go, and I want you to take a drink. They looked at him and they laughed. You want us to go drink water as a test? He said, yeah. This is what God has asked me for you to do. So little by little, all 6,000 of the men went down and they started drinking. Then they came back, and after all of them had gotten their fill of water, They stood around Gideon. Gideon looked at them and he said, okay, here's what God has told me. Those of you that decided to lean straight into the river and drink, I don't need you. Excuse me? That's how we always do it. God does not need you, and you will not be able to, we will not have the victory if you're staying here. Okay, Gideon, whatever. But he looked at the others and he said, those of you that took your hand and cupped the water to drink it while watching in all directions, God has told me that you will be the warriors that he has chosen and who the victory will be shown through. The men that were leaving heard Gideon say that, and they shook their heads, laughing all the way around. Because all that were left were 300 men. And they could hear the rest of the group going, Gideon and his 300 men, yeah, we'll see if they get the victory. But right then and right there, all Gideon could hear was this: Gideon, warrior of God, the victory is assured. The dreams will come. You will be shown what to do and how to do it. Just follow, just trust. Obey that what I have said you will do, and you will go forward with a story more than conqueror because of what I've told you to do.